We have in Geneva mainly an impressive number of international organizations giving their contribution in many areas, and I would say that the humanitarian engagement is one of those top areas where we are in, thanks mainly to ICRC, which is one of our partners here this evening, together with Sistars and with the Polytechnical School that are another masterpiece of the Swiss success in Switzerland and abroad. I think that we have the ingredient. Now it's up to you to play the game and to perform and to give us Switzerland to remain till the very end one of those countries that showed particularly big and strong engagement for the success of Expo 2020 Dubai. We are doing that from the very beginning, not through this beautiful pavilion, but also, as you may know, we are chairing the steering committee of the of all the participating countries at this Expo, which makes Switzerland a kind of a privileged partner of the organizer, and this is also something I'm very proud of. So without further ado, I would like to again thank you all for participating in this event. Thank you, Mr. Larini and Swissnex, for organizing this event together with all your partners, and of course wish you good luck for this event. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, before I introduce our esteemed panelists, I'd like to give you an introduction about the topic. Louis Pasteur once said that science knows no country because knowledge belongs to humanity. And it is a torch which illuminates the world. However, we live in a world where 2/3 of medical equipment produced serve only 10% of the global population. We live in a world where 1.5 million children, younger than 5 years old, lack proper vaccination because we're not able to keep this vaccination, to store them. Vaccines are abundant, but we waste a huge amount of vaccines because of lack of proper equipment. We live in a world where 1/3 of all food is wasted. And on the other hand, 800 million people don't have enough food to get through, to live a healthy and active lifestyle. Tonight, we want to bring the humanity, the humanitarian action back into technology, into innovation. And so we are looking at how essential technology can help us to deliver the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. We will do so by presenting a nexus, which is very important to grasp because this will be the fil rouge throughout the event. This nexus is between innovation, humanitarian action, also linked to sustainable development, but also entrepreneurship. And this is what we'll be discovering this evening. But without further ado, I'd like to introduce our esteemed panelists, and thank you very much for joining us tonight. So we have Dr. Elke Neumann of the United Arab Emirates University, who is an associate professor in the field of plant nutrition and soil science of the College of Agriculture and Veterinary Medicine of the UAE. Dr. Neumann obtained her PhD at Hohenheim University in Stuttgart in 2005, and then in 2010, she became a faculty member of the College of Agriculture and Veterinary Science of the UAE in Al Ain. And through her research done with her groups, she has been developing novel strategies to make better use of agricultural nutrients and also water usage. And Dr. Neumann has been involved in applied agricultural research across a wide range of climatic settings in Germany, China, and the UAE. And she serves as the chair of the UAEU's Integrative Agriculture Department and director of of the Abu Dhabi Virtual Research Institute for Food Security in Drylands. Elke, it's a pleasure to have you. We have also joining us live from his hotel room, not so far from here, he's in Dubai, but unfortunately, Professor Gilles Carbonnier, Vice President of the ICRC, is not able to join us in person. Professor Gilles Carbonnier is the Vice President of the International Committee of the Red Cross. As you know, the ICRC was established in 1863 through the initiative of Henri Dunant. And the ICRC operates in the world to help people affected by conflicts and protect civilians and the ones in need. And they are the guardian of the Geneva Conventions and the international humanitarian law. And Professor Carbonnier has worked with the ICRC in Iraq, Ethiopia, El Salvador, and Sri Lanka. And he also served as an economic advisor at the ICRC's headquarters in Geneva. Then, between 1992 and 1996, he was also in charge of international trade agreements, negotiations at the WTO and the GATT, and advising the Swiss State Secretariat of Economic Affairs. Since 2007, Professor Carbonnier has also been a professor of development economics at the Graduate Institute in Geneva. And his expertise is in international cooperation, the economic dynamics of armed conflicts, and the nexus between natural resources and development. And in 2018, Professor Carbonnier was appointed Vice President of the ICRC. Professor Carbonnier, Gilles, it's a pleasure to have you. Thank you very much for being here. We also have Mrs. Lorraine Charles, who is the co-founder and executive director of NAMAL. NAMAL partners with leading organizations to support refugees and the vulnerable populations through skill training, mentorship, and remote work placements opportunities. And she's the co-founder and executive director of this organization. Lorraine is a social entrepreneur and researcher. She is a research associate at the Center for Business Research at the University of Cambridge in the UK. She's also a member of the MIT REACT Advisory Committee and the International Rescue Committee Technical Advisory Committee for Rebuild, serving the activities in Eastern Africa. Lorraine, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
And last but not least, we are also very pleased to host Natalie Sigris Monandini, who is with us and who is the head of Stakeholder Relations and Special Projects at the EPFL Essential Tech Center in Lausanne. As you might know, the EPFL is one of our federal polytechnical schools in Lausanne, and they have launched the Essential Tech Center, which looks at harnessing innovation to support sustainable development, humanitarian action, and peace promotion. And Natalie has implemented numerous humanitarian and development projects throughout numerous NGOs in her career, in areas such as the Balkans, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Central America. Her expertise covers issues related to gender-based violence, migrant assistance, and integration. She also worked for the International Organization of Migration in Geneva, and she holds a master's in the social sciences. Natalie, thank you for being here. So, without further ado, I would like to invite Natalie to give us a presentation about the EPFL Essential Tech Center and also on Tech for Good. Natalie, the floor is yours.
Yes.
Oh.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting us. We are so thrilled and proud to tell you about our job, our work at the EPFL. And we are so happy also to share a few stories, a few successful stories about our work. I'm here to talk about essential technologies. The essential technologies that we develop to support sustainable development, humanitarian action, and peace promotion. But before I tell you about how we work, about our methodology, let me show you a few pictures if you want. What is it according to you? What is it that you see here? Okay, let me tell you, this is indeed a picture that was taken in Sierra Leone in the backyard of a hospital. What you can see here is medical devices that is clearly unused or is not usable. As a matter of fact, the World Health Organization gives this estimate: 70% of the donated medical devices in the world is not functioning, is not working. And there are many reasons for this. One of the reasons is that basically this medical equipment was sent when it was already used. It was sent incomplete, with missing parts. It was also sent maybe dirty. But that's not all. This medical equipment is not adapted to the reality of low and middle income countries. What's that reality? What is different from industrialized countries and those countries? Well, in the view of engineering, there are four main obstacles in terms of technology. Well, first of all, those low and middle income countries do not have the resources to purchase the medical equipment. And if they do not have the resources and the money to buy the equipment, they don't have it either for the maintenance, for the spare parts. The second problem is that there is a lack of educated people to use and repair these devices. The third component is that locally the context is very particular. The climate is harsh, there is humidity, there is dust, and these are not very friendly with technology. And the fourth component, it's linked to the poor infrastructure in those countries in terms of electricity and electricity provision and the quality of the electricity supply. So because of all these components, it's not possible to simply shift what we have developed in the West, in the North, as a technology, and shift it or sell it or, send it in those contexts. It simply cannot work. This picture is interesting, right? What you see here is an incubator, a neonatal incubator with two bottles that were placed by the health workers. In these bottles, there is hot water to keep the baby warm during power cuts, which is very common. So what have we done at the Essential Tech Center about it? Well, we have created this. The public here can see it here, and for the audience, you can see it here. This is our latest baby, can I say so? This is the Global Neonat project. What is so innovative about this project? Well, obviously the design is nice. The designer won multiple prizes for this beautiful incubator. But what's really innovative in this incubator? It's the battery. There is a battery, a thermic battery that we patented, and that can work and keep the baby warm for 4 hours during power cuts, which is the real innovation. Another innovation, of course, is that it's resistant to harsh climate and dust. It's easy to clean, it's easy to transport. There's a simple interface. Well, you see, all those components I mentioned before, we've included them in the development of the design of this technology. Now, this has been developed at the EPFL. As Dante mentioned, this is a Swiss technical school, innovation and science school. We have 3 missions, namely teaching, research, and innovation. we have this fantastic pool of laboratories. We have more than 370 laboratories with all different expertise. And talking about incubators, the EPFL is a nice incubator for startups because we actually created roughly 300 startups since 2000. And within the EPFL, there's a center. It's the center for which I work. It's the EPFL Essential Tech Center. And yes, we have the mandate to use this expertise of the EPFL to harness science and technology for sustainable development projects, for humanitarian action. And ultimately, we also decided to embark on the promotion of peace through technology. Let me tell you a few words about our approach. What is so particular about us, about the way we work? Well, three key words: cooperation, interdisciplinarity, and entrepreneurship. Well, you see, this beautiful incubator, it wouldn't be there if we hadn't cooperated with local stakeholders. In this specific case, we are partnering with the Kenyan-based Public Health Specialist Institute. The second key word is, of course, with 370 labs, we can bring interdisciplinarity into our innovations. And you need to put a lot of brains together to, push the boundaries and innovate. And the third point, which is interesting as well, it's the entrepreneurship. How so? Well, because when we do develop a technology in the academia, at the EPFL Center, well, once the technology is mature enough, well, then we transfer it to the private sector because we want to scale up. We want to have an impact. So how do we do this? Well, most of the time we do create startups. And this allows us, from the very beginning, when we design the idea, the technology, we have in mind that the startup that will be created will have to be based on a social business model. So it can, right from the beginning, include social and environmental parameters in the technology. This leads me also to show you that we like this picture. You probably know this value chain, Canva. Well, we use it as well in the design of the technology. Each segment of the project is carefully, thought. It's not only about inventing. We always say inventing is not enough. The technology, yes, it's very important. And there are challenges, the technical challenges, yes, but it's not enough. We need to include information and reflection on all the segments. How will the technology be manufactured? Where? How will it be transported? Who will assemble it? Who will use it? Who will maintain it? And ultimately, how will it be recycled? So we take into consideration all these segments right from the beginning of the project, in the design, in the engineering, reflection. And one very important aspect, of course, is the cost. If one of the segments, one of the link is too expensive, well, the value chain is broken. Let me show you a few success stories of our center. I think this is, the most interesting story so far. At present day, only 1/3 of humanity has access to X-rays. And this is because all of the reasons I mentioned before, the cost of the equipment, the climate, the education, etc. So what have we done? We have created this digital radiology system. It's an all-in-one system. There is a battery, again, here. It's resistant to dust. And there is no need to develop the pictures anymore. because this would include consumables in the laboratory, and this would cost money. So we immediately decided to develop this digital tool. So once the shots are made, teleradiology is possible, and those pictures can be sent to remote places where there are experts, because the expertise is not always available where you take the shot. We are very proud of this equipment, of course. We can also say that it's affordable. So the challenge was taken. It's 4 to 6 times cheaper than the regular machines in the market. And if it's good for the South, it's good for the North, right? This is another success stories, including the ICRC. Each year, the ICRC have to provide at least 35,000 prostheses to people harmed during violent conflicts. And they do have a prosthetics that is quite cheap and resistant and robust. But this prosthesis, you can see it here, it's the dark one. Well, it doesn't allow for a very active life because it's too rigid. So they put us under the challenge of developing a prosthesis that would be, using a new material, but usually those materials are very costly, and they are not suitable for the context of crisis, nor low and middle income countries. So we did it. Not only we did develop this prosthesis that is flexible and resistant, but we also kept it cheap. It's only $80 a piece. It's 40 times cheaper than what you can find on the market with the same material. One interesting thing to say also is that ICRC holds the patent for it, and it's going to be it's going to have a big impact. Sorry. Talking about ICRC, to finish my presentation, well, you see this prosthesis project was so successful that, well, it became clear that partnering, with humanitarian workers and engineers and scientists was something that made sense and was actually necessary and good and relevant. So in 2020, EPFL, ICRC, and ETH, which is the other Swiss tech institute in Zurich, we have created this partnership, and with the goal to develop multiple research projects responding to the ICRC needs in the field. In a way, we want and we are creating a pole of excellence in terms of engineering for humanitarian action. Let me show you a few examples of the research projects we are currently leading. One is a project to develop a private biometric system for aid distribution without endangering people's privacy. And this is something we're going to talk about later during the conversation. Data protection is fundamentally so vital these days, and we all know it. We also have a project including artificial intelligence that allows ICRC better plan its response in zones that are not accessible for multiple reasons, and how to estimate a population in a zone you cannot access, well, by crossing data coming from combining satellite images as well as the activities on the social networks. Last but not least, after these successful 2 years, we've decided to start a round 2, for which we are actively looking for support. And we want to do the same, more actually, and better. We want to do more joint research projects, but we want to develop and test the most promising solutions in the field and scale them up. And we want to have a higher impact. What's interesting also with our program is that we are also launching 3 educational programs accessible for everyone, but in particular for humanitarian organizations or workers or professionals, because we need to share the expertise in terms of data, in terms of the challenges of today with technology, innovation, and humanitarian action. So these educational programs will be 2 MOOCs, 2 massive online open courses, and one course in Zurich. You can find out more about this initiative on the website here. I'm really happy if I can talk about this later with you at the aperitivo. And I would like to thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Natalie. I think the example you shared about the different equipments you're developing, the Essential Tech Center, is a very nice introduction to the events and also this nexus between entrepreneurship, innovation, and humanitarian action. I have a question. As you mentioned, you're dealing with many different stakeholders, from the private sector, international organization, academia. What is the main challenge in coordinating all of these different, I mean, you were just mentioning it's a huge amount of stakeholders, and what's the secret behind the coordination of these different stakeholders to assure the implementation?
There's not only one secret. A lot of patience, time. You need a lot of time. But I think it's good to have a common vision, you know? Once you have a vision and you share this vision, then, you know, the path will appear. But it's a lot of work and coordination.
Very good. I would like also to hear from Professor Carbonnier from the other side of the ICRC, and maybe you could share a bit more about how you're collaborating in terms of research and also with the private sector. Gilles, do you have anything you would like to add? What is your secret recipe for the dialogue amongst these different stakeholders?
Thank you very much, Dante. First, good evening, everyone, and Ambassador Badji, ladies and gentlemen, friends. Great pleasure to join you virtually, although I would, of course, have preferred to be with you in person this evening. And indeed, I think as Natalie presented the involvement of Essential Tech, of EPFL, what is really important to understand is that, you know, we have been around for 160 years doing humanitarian action. And what we see today is that this digital transformation is not just a technical or technological issue, it's a game changer. And it changes the way war and armed conflicts are being waged. It changes the way we can respond to them, but it's also provide agency, and it empowers potentially the people who suffers in humanitarian crisis. So it's a game changer. And just to give you one example, we have started to really work on hate speech, disinformation, and misinformation, because it is in armed conflict that it is most damaging. And it is in armed conflict that societies cannot respond or manage this. And the consequences can be, you know, dramatic, up to genocide. So we are looking with EPFL on how disinformation sometimes jeopardizes the room and the space to work for aid organization, for humanitarian organization. And with Yale University, we are looking at the humanitarian consequences of hate speech and disinformation in major conflicts, and how we can provide a guide also to private sector companies, to operators, to states, and to all partners in order to reduce the risks of this major humanitarian impact. So it's just one example to show you that indeed we have to engage. And I'm very glad that the partnership we are having with the EPFL, the ETH in Zurich, and others is really producing fruits. And we need support in order to turn from research to prototyping and implementation.
Thank you very much, Gilles. I think now the following is going to happen. We're going to dive into 3 different themes, and after each theme we'll open the discussion. So the first theme is going to be migration and people on the move. As you know, we haven't had as many people on the move migrants since World War II, which represents a lot of different issues. And to give you more context, we'd like to show you an introductory video on the issue, which is going to showcase just now.
The suddenness of the fighting in Tigray region led to a lot of family separation. So together with our partner in Restoring Family Links, the Sudan Red Crescent, the ICRC visited the sites where refugees were arriving to, and we were inundated with a lot of Restoring Family Links requests because of the nature of the separation.
ألقاهم حي وأتمنى ألقاهم حي بس.
So this gives you the context of this issue, which is a worldwide problem. But we do have solutions out there. We do have initiatives which try and facilitate this process. And Lorraine, if you would like, will show us one case study through the NAMA organization that she leads.
Thank you. Am I on?
Oh yeah, you have the clicker just there too.
Am I on? Oh. Sorry, everyone.
No, it's on.
Oh, hello?
It should work.
Yes? So thank you, everyone. So NAMO was born out of my research, trying to understand what the problems were in terms of employment for refugees and other displaced populations. There's a lot of emphasis often on education, often on primary education, but very little understanding of what happens post-education. And what I wanted to emphasize, how can we reconceptualize what it means to be employed? And I see employment and livelihoods and dignified livelihoods as a really core element to resilience for displaced populations. With dignified employment comes education, comes health, comes food and nutrition. Once someone is employed or has a way to sustain themselves, all of these pieces fall into place. So how can we reconceptualize what employment means? COVID has changed our lives. So there are 2 things I always say. COVID has turned every company into a tech company. The future of work is now. So what does employment look like? For us, employment has changed, and COVID has allowed us to recognize that it's not easy for us to reconceptualize education. How can we provide a way for refugees and other displaced populations to access the future of work, to access what employment is going to look like in the future? So what we do is we provide refugees the skills to work remotely. Most refugees live in countries where the local population struggle to find employment. An additional population places an extra burden on host countries. A lot of refugees will live in countries where they don't have legal access to employment in the places they live. Places like Uganda are the exception to the norm, where refugees have equal access to the labour market. But even Uganda, there aren't enough jobs for everyone. We know that there's a global shortage of work. The global north, we can't find the talent that we need in the global north. Companies are struggling to find people to fill the jobs. with COVID, we've recognized that we can find people who are not within our 40-kilometer radius. How can we use this to give populations who are outside of our radius opportunities to work? So that's what we do. We give refugees who are highly skilled, and this is one thing that the media fails to show us. The refugees are skilled, they are educated. The only thing that separates a refugee from us is a political status. No difference in education. So how can we link the two? With remote work, we can link refugees where they are, lacking opportunities, to the global north, where there's a need for skilled talent. I'll stop there and you're off with the next question.
Thank you very much, Lauren. That's a beautiful example because it really combines the entrepreneurship side, but also the technology side, which I think is extremely relevant to the conversation. I just had, so your organization is a social enterprise, right? And so my question is, how do you partner with companies? Is it more, do you offer them a business case, or would it be more linked to their corporate social responsibility? What is the equilibrium between both?
That's a really good question, and thank you for asking that. When we set up the organization, we were quite determined and specific that we will not be a non-profit because we need to find a sustainable model for us to be self-sufficient. The whole development world and the whole NGO sector needs to be reconceptualized. The fact that someone from Microsoft and Google, who is as skilled as someone working for a non-profit, earns 10 times as much for the same skill level, it doesn't seem to equate. So when we set up our organization, we were determined to find a business case for us to work. So our business case is, your companies in the global north, you lack talent. We're training this talent and we're presenting this talent to you. So you will pay us to train this talent and to present this talent to you. The second really important thing is companies are recognizing that diversity is important. After the events of 2020 and George Floyd, there's a whole movement toward what is diversity, and cognitive diversity is really what companies are looking for. Cognitive diversity improves performance of companies. And how can we get this cognitive diversity? It doesn't mean hiring someone who looks different from the same university you've hired from traditionally, or someone who has a different religion from the same community in which you normally hire from. Cognitive diversity is hiring people from a truly different context. And this is what refugees and displaced populations present. Interesting that you showed Ethiopia. Ethiopia also, as well as producing refugees to South Sudan, Ethiopia has been hosting refugees for a long time from Eritrea. Eritrean refugees are highly educated, but they lack opportunities. I can say to a company, you need talent. Here's Eritrean refugee who's got a degree. You may not recognize the university, but we have trained him with our partners. We work with MIT, we work with an organization called Tech Refugees. We've trained them in the technical skills and also the human skills for him or her to really integrate into your organization. So that's how we present our business case to companies. We're giving you what you need to make yourself more profitable.
Okay, very, very interesting. So the entrepreneurship side, the sustainability side, financial sustainability is key. But I also have a question in terms of, in all humanitarian settings, are there any limits to entrepreneurship? I'm not sure this could be a question for Gilles actually. In fields such as in the Sahel, would you replicate this entrepreneurship setting? Or in other words, can we just let the private sector be free in the development of entrepreneurship, or are there obstacles and things to bear in mind?
Maybe I can begin with that. So for entrepreneurship, I have an interesting relationship with the whole idea of entrepreneurship. A lot of entrepreneurship in displaced populations and in refugee settings is survival entrepreneurship. You become an entrepreneur because you have no access to employment. And often entrepreneurship is sort of presented as the silver bullet. Look, we don't have job opportunities in your community, in your region, so you become an entrepreneur. But often the people who become entrepreneurs don't actually have the skills to run a business. So how can we fill that gap? And this is where our sort of solution, remote work, can support this. By gaining experience with a company, you can gain the skills to then have an entrepreneurship venture within your community. You work for a company, you earn money, and you aren't earning money as a survival entrepreneur. You're earning money because you are highly skilled. You bring that money, that foreign exchange, from the global north into your community in the global south, usually, which is where most refugees live. You bring that money into your community. You spend within your community, but also because your income is above the average income, because you're on the scale of people within the global north, you have money to then create a venture to employ people. So not only are you building skills, which perhaps is the most important part, because as an entrepreneur, I was an entrepreneur with zero experience in business. I had to learn these skills. And as privileged as I was comparatively, I struggled to gain these skills, even with all the access to resources I have. For someone who doesn't have that access, it's very, very difficult, I feel, to really become a successful entrepreneur. The statistic is 1 out of 10 entrepreneurs are successful. And this is within an environment which is conducive to it. How can we then translate this into displaced populations and more vulnerable communities to give them the opportunity to be successful by getting the private sector to support them, and financially, but also through the skills which they're being developed through this.
Okay, Lorraine. Thank you. That's. I just wanted to see, Gilles, on your side, do you also have the same beliefs in terms of entrepreneurship, that this can easily be replicated in your different fields? Let's say it could be in the Sahel, it could be in Yemen, in Afghanistan. What are your views on this theme?
No, I think what Lorraine and you just discussed is spot on. We have ever more protracted situations of displacement, with people staying somehow in limbo for sometimes years. And how can we, help them generate an income? How can we help them be part of the society and reduce the tensions between the displaced people and the resident population? And what is proposed here is key. I will just give you a few examples of, I think what we need to do is to mobilize seed capital for some, micro enterprise to flourish, and also link vulnerable displaced people, refugees, with companies. So an example where we linked with companies is in Colombia. We had these hundreds of thousands of Venezuelans crossing into Colombia, and many young people were idle, not having any occupation and no education possibilities. So with the volunteers of the Colombian Red Cross, we approached companies, both multinational and local companies, to say, okay, we are going to subsidize the 3 first months of the salary of a young Venezuelan who is here, who can join your company and work. And after 3 months, you decide. We will stop the subsidy, but you decide whether you are happy, you want to keep your young recruit or not. And the retention rate was quite good. And this was important. Another example is I was last July in Benghazi, in Libya. And there we have really given a seed money, but also some training in basic management. So financial literacy and management skills to especially women who wanted to restart, widows who wanted to restart an activity. And the training has been very successful according to the school. It's a private school of management training. But then also we could see that they could really sense what are the market opportunity in Benghazi today to resume a livelihood for themselves and their family. So I think seed capital, skills, and connections with companies is really what we need to then progress. And we don't have enough of it, mainly because of risk aversion of many investors and companies when it comes to very fragile contexts. So we have to bring a way to reduce the risk and to engage more companies, investors in those places where there are opportunities.
Thank you, Gilles. That's very relevant.
Add one quick
Actually,
thing.
Lorena, I'm sorry,
Sorry.
we have to move on. I do
After.
apologize. Afterwards, yes, we'll have plenty of time. We'll actually move into the food and climate change, which is Elke's domain. Before we do so, I'd like to open the floor for one or two very brief questions. We'll have a lot of time for questions afterwards. I'm not sure from the audience if you have any things you would like to ask. Oh, yes, ma'am.
Regarding the prosthetic, the price is USD $80, and that is, will the price remain that way after the patent is filed and successfully filed? After the patent is successfully filed, will the price remain at USD 80 per piece?
Yeah, the idea is, as I mentioned before, the idea is to sell the technology. And, you know, the patent here, well, the ownership of the patent is ICRC. So I will maybe let Gilles tell about what their plan is. But the idea is, I'm quite pretty sure, because we share the same vision. We want, you know, the good things to be available for everyone. We are developing essential technologies at an affordable price because they are needed. And there's no point in developing and putting all these efforts in developing those devices, and it takes years to do that, and then to sell only to a very limited audience. But it's not sustainable, or economically speaking, and it's not in our vision either. We do it because we want the low and middle income countries to have access to those essential devices.
Okay. Thank you very much for your question. Now we're going to move into the second theme, which is going to be climate change, but specifically addressed at food and water scarcity. So let us watch a short movie clip to give us the setting of the issue.
Of the 20 countries most vulnerable to climate change, the majority are at war. This means people are facing a double threat.
Tu vois, quand 100 personnes vont vouloir se partager ce qui suffisait à 5 personnes, ça ne peut pas aller. Soit tout le monde part, ou bien tous les gens s'entretuent. Ça va être ça. Tout est parti de la sécheresse là qu'il y a.
بالعراق درجات الحرارة ترتفع والجو صار كلش حار، المطر أقل والحرب خلت مينا ملوث وقاعنا متدمرة.
This double threat of climate change and war pushes people out of their homes, breaks food and supply chains, amplifies diseases, and weakens healthcare services. By 2050, the need for humanitarian aid is expected to double if urgent steps are not taken. We cannot let this happen. Climate funding and action must reach people in conflict zones. Climate change affects us all, but those living with this double threat can't be left to face it alone.
Okay, well, this gives us the setting of the second theme, and I would like to ask Elke to present us a solution, an innovation, which can help to alleviate the problem. Elke, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, first of all, for having me here in this very, very nice meeting. And thank you also for this video. This is a very nice video because it shows how food security and water security is a prerequisite for peace. And it's also through this counteracting displacement and migration and war. Yeah, when we look, I was a bit insisting actually on keeping the emphasis on the dry lands here, because this is what I have been working on for the last 20 years, and because we are in a very dry land here in the UAE, and we share this with around 1/3 of the world's population. 1 in 3 people live in the dry lands of the world. And this is likely to increase, as the movie has also shown, in the future, because the dry lands of the world have the highest population growth among all ecological zones on Earth, and climate change is also going to increase. So when we look into research and education towards food security and water security. Yeah, thank you so much. I would like to emphasize on the difference between adaptation and true innovation. Because I think this difference is quite critical in this particular field of research. I will give you an example for an adaptation of a technology, of an agricultural technology. I will take greenhouses. Here in the UAE are many greenhouses, in other drylands, warm drylands as well, are also a lot of greenhouses. I think alone around 8,000 greenhouse operations in Abu Dhabi. So, so greenhouses, you all know what the greenhouse effect is, right? Greenhouses are infrastructure that was originally developed for cold climatic regions to produce crops in the winter. Yeah, it's an infrastructure that heats up. Yeah, if you leave a greenhouse alone here outside without any cooling system, the interior temperature rises to 80 degrees centigrade. Yeah, it happened to me sometimes when the cooling system failed. So what happened then? The technology was adapted. Greenhouses with an evaporative cooling system. Yeah, requiring around 300 to 500 liters per greenhouse per hour in the summer for cooling, potable water. So that's of course not very sustainable, so the new technologies were developed, yeah, and a wide array of new techniques have come up: photovoltaic greenhouses, seawater, smart greenhouse, whatever, yeah. These technologies that we have learned from the past, they're either very expensive or they are not very sustainable. So the farmers who do not have the money to go for the expensive option go for the unsustainable one. And here we are on the road to poverty, I believe. That has been a main accelerator of soil degradation, water degradation, poverty, making farmers dependent on seeds, on genotypes of plants, on chemicals, agricultural chemicals that were produced in other countries. Yeah, so this hasn't been very successful. I would even say, from my experience, that's a major cause of poverty in the world. So, yeah, and also of unsustainability. Yeah, carbon footprints have been enormously high on this path. Now I'm very happy actually, because right now in the last few years we see here in the UAE and the Gulf region a big shift away from this path towards a path of true innovation, of real innovation, of coming up with solutions that are really adapted, or let's say, yeah, developed, not adapted, developed for this particular climate here. So, and this makes actually at the moment this region very attractive for agricultural researchers like me. Yeah, so this is really, really nice. And yeah, so I will just show you an example. I'm not really advertising this here as an ultimate solution. It's something we are developing right now. It's just an example of a technology that is specifically developed for dry, warm regions of the world. So instead of using greenhouses for protected plant cultivation, an infrastructure that traps heat, we are developing an infrastructure that traps cold air. So this is in the shape of a large valley. We call this an agricultural artificial valley. So if we look at the transverse section of this valley, we see here that yeah, there's an inlet of cold air at the base of it. And this is an infrastructure actually meant to trap and sustain cold air and to recycle water as well, rather than trapping heat. So yeah, this is very interesting. As I said, there's a lot of similar developments going on here in the UAE, which is really, really exciting. This has to happen also in other arid and semi-arid parts of the world. This has to also happen in countries that are much larger, that are maybe less rich than the UAE and less politically stable than this country. And I think, and now I'm talking as a European as well as a UAE researcher, I think it's our task to support this. Sounds very easy, but we should also not forget that the adaptation of technologies is relatively easy and has been an enormously good business in the past for many, many agricultural companies in the world. Yeah. So ultimately, I think humanitarian action is always good, but the extent to which they will be needed in the future, ultimately, probably depends on the extent by which the big economies in the world are ready to sacrifice a bit of the short-term economic benefit at the national level for global sustainability and global peace. That is something we all will have to sort out. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Elke. This is a very impressive research, these values. But I wanted to ask you, what is the next step to bring this to, well, the UAE is a wealthy country, but what is the next step for, number one, companies to have an interest in investing in this, and then possibly applying this to other countries which are less fortunate, such as Yemen or other arid countries? What, according to you, what would be the next steps to have this implementation?
Yeah, thank you. This is a very, very good question, of course. I think this is still very in a relatively early development stage. These valleys are going to be built out of bauxite residue. That's an industrial waste material that's also produced here in the UAE as a waste material from aluminium smelting. And so we are partnering, or hope to partner with the aluminium factories, the EGA, to they develop this also as a recycling strategy. And when this is successful, I think we first have to really develop this here, where we have the infrastructure to do it. And then in the end, the technology is exported to other places in other countries. But it's an enormous opportunity here. We have the infrastructure here to develop these technologies. And that's what we should utilize. And I think the UAE is really ready for this. So that's an enormous opportunity.
Thank you, Elke. Natalie, a question for you. Let's say if Elke came to the PFN Essential Tech Center, okay, and was proposing this research, this initiative, what would be, according to you, is it compatible entirely with your methodology, or would you say, according to you, there are some things you would believe should be adapted? What would be your opinion?
No, I believe that we share the same opinions, and the ingredients she mentioned are the ingredients we like to use as well. I think we need to tailor-made solutions that are sustainable, and I think it's so interesting to learn that this technology could be made out of a waste that is available in the country. So. Well, it's very fascinating and promising. So no, I believe that it seems that we have some things in common, and obviously nutrition, food nutrition, farming are fundamentally challenges that need essential technologies. That's for sure.
Thank you very much. One thing which, when you mentioned agriculture, this also links to financial sustainability, to the revenues of different people. Agriculture is the main employer in the world. And so, in your opinion, and also for you, Lorraine, how do you think technology can ensure that the revenues from agriculture, from farming, can be enhanced? What would be, according to you, the role of technology in this field?
So you're asking how can the revenue earned from the technology from farming be enhanced? So that's an interesting question. If we consider that a lot of places that have food shortages, where that suffer from climate and migration crisis, have very unsustainable financial systems. A lot of people in these places can't easily integrate into global financial systems. They can't get bank accounts. They can't save. And this is especially the case for women. over 1 billion people don't have access to financial services, and often because of lack of identification. So this is one challenge that, that globally we've been facing. How can we have individuals access financial services? And Gilles spoke about, seed funding. Great, but unless you integrate it into financial systems, even within your community, the seed funding can't get to you. So this is one obstacle which we have to try to understand. How can we get these people who don't have access to these things? How can we get the unbanked banked? And this is one of the significant challenges.
Very good, very good. Yes, I think, I'm not sure, Gilles, also regarding financing, we are in a COVID world, and financing is getting harder and harder to get. So we're leaving the microfinancing and moving on more the macro level. And I wanted to know, is innovation a way of responding to scarcer financing? In other way, can innovation be a way of using more efficiently the resources for humanitarian action in this world?
Yeah, building on what also Elke has said, my response is double yes. First, you can and we should innovate more in new financing instruments and models. We have launched 4 years ago the first ever humanitarian impact bond, and we could bring investors to upload or to front load 27 million or $30 million, but basically 27 million Swiss francs, to provide responses to people with disabilities in 3 locations in Africa. And they are being paid back this year, depending on whether we have, delivered in terms of humanitarian impact. And I think that having more of new ways of financing key issues, for instance, when it comes to water, we are now trying to mobilize over $40 million or $50 million of funding from private companies, development finance, concessional loans, and humanitarian funding to expand the water provision system of Goma in the DRC. This is the first time that we try to really bring people like us who know the system, who have been trying to maintain and patch water provision systems for years in a difficult situation, and others who could expand, upgrade it. So this is key. And I think that new financing models as well as new partnership modalities are 2 ways to really provide a response. It's not specifically to arid or semi-arid areas, but I think this is key.
Okay, thank you very much for your response. Before we move to the 3rd theme, I wanted to know if you have any questions in the audience. Yes, you would have a question here.
Hello, everybody. My name is Helena. I'm from the Croatian Pavilion. Thank you all for this wonderful panel. I would have one quick question for Dr. Elke Neumann. You mentioned soil degradation. I was wondering, I know that's not the focal point of this discussion. However, we are experiencing the fact that the soil, since we have been using many artificial fertilizers, the quality of the soil has degraded, and now we're looking for the ways to recover it. In Croatia, we had an experiment with Formula 500. I don't know if you've heard about it. It's a natural fertilizer which farmers have been using for quite a while and noticed a really, really great process of recovering the ground, the soil. Also, they have been using the same formula in Australia, where they've managed to make the mainland of Australia, fertile, which was amazing because we all know what Australia looks like. So my question would be, how do you look at the possibility of soil recovery, and how do you consider it, especially in the 3rd countries? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's an interesting a question. There are indeed a lot of soil improvers and fertilizers on the market, also coming here to the UAE, entering the market. I think many of them are very good and very promising and really worth being tested. This is what we do almost on a daily basis in our own lab even. One thing I think we shouldn't do is to think that we can quickly fix soils. That, let's say, oh, no matter if it's degraded, we can just add a little bit of stuff and then it will be fine again. This is not going to happen. Soils are very, very sensitive, and they have been classified by the FAO in 2015 as non-renewable resources for a purpose. Because the FAO at that time wanted to clearly demonstrate, hey guys, when they are lost, they are lost. 10 centimeters of soil take 2,000 years to form. Yeah, so this is a very vulnerable resource that we should not degrade, but yes, such soil improvers can be beneficial. Yeah.
Oh, we have a question in front.
Well, my question is going to all of you, but in particular to Madame Lorraine Charles. Have you looked into some different way of financing all the things? Like I've been aware of an initiative for it's not Bitcoin, it's what is it called? Blockchain. Blockchain in healthcare and blockchain, and I've heard many good things happening also in East Africa. Have you heard about that? Because I've been working as a manager in Africa for almost 20 years before I went back to Europe. And the financial system, is it donation, is it whatever, works against the good thing. You see the 70% of the things that are wasted, 70% of money, or intentionally or not intentionally wasted, and a lot of time what's missing is just a way of grouping energy or financial energy throughout the scope without going to the financial world.
So, blockchain and Bitcoin and blockchain. Okay, so okay, sorry. So blockchain as a way of finance, is that what you want? As a mechanism to support financial inclusion?
We can discuss it offline, because it's something that attracted me so much. It seems that there is something happening that couple the finance and what it's actually done at a place where there's no resources, there's no identification, there's no all the things you've been talking about.
So this is a really interesting discussion. It's something that I've been thinking about and sort of researching with other sort of people in this space. Blockchain is very difficult in low resource countries because when we look at the unbanked, they need a way to get cash. No. Well, for vulnerable populations, this is still what they need, and I know, but it doesn't really work that way on the ground, and this is what I've experienced, and a lot of European countries are sort of moving away from blockchain into more traditional financial systems. So, there's still a lot of research to understand how can blockchain and crypto support financial inclusion, but from what from the discussions I have, there's still a lot of skepticism for these populations. For example, in Lebanon, where which is a good example of where it can be used because of the fragility of the banking system. It's very difficult for them to actually operationalize it in a place where they should be able to use it, because it's still very much unregulated, and sometimes the unregulation sometimes is an advantage, but often it creates this sort of shadow economy space for those trying to access financial services through this mechanism.
Okay, Thank you very much. Exactly, during the apéro. So now we're going to dive into the third and last theme, which is about digitalization, about all the benefits that it provides in terms of refugees, for example, being able to connect with their families, but also all the risks by divulgating your data. So we speak of digital dilemma. And for this, I would like to showcase a short video to introduce us to the topic.
There's a new global gold rush going on. The new gold is data, and it's being mined every day from cell phones, computers, and networks all around the world. That data is collected and used to promote products, services, or political messages. But data can also save lives. Humanitarian organizations use data to track diseases, pinpoint critical needs during crisis, or deliver life-saving health information.
When there is an emergency, while some volunteers are applying first aid and helping those affected, there is few of them who are trained at assessing the situation, collecting critical information, critical data, and then sending it real time to the emergency operation room so that people who are making decisions make information-based decisions.
Clearly, this data has great value, but how do we ensure it's only used to do good? The problem is, the digital world is still largely unregulated. While international laws and symbols are used to protect aid workers and people impacted by conflict, there are few protections for sensitive data.
How do we put a Red Cross or a Red Crescent on a server? How do we put a Red Cross or a Red Crescent on a database or a thumb drive?
Armed groups or governments, for example, could obtain data to track people it considers enemies, or human traffickers might use data to identify vulnerable targets. Meanwhile, the phone networks, banks, and social media platforms that aid groups use to provide services have their own agendas.
Many of the companies who provide these platforms and these services have data-driven, data-intensive business models. They depend on the vast processing of data in order to thrive. Often these companies have little concern for human rights or even any consideration for how different users might be affected by the different products that they provide.
If people see their data is being misused, humanitarians could lose their most precious asset, the trust of those they hope to help.
If people don't trust you, if people don't trust that you're going to be protecting them and their personal data, if people don't trust that you're going to be sticking to the fundamental principles of neutrality, impartiality, independence, and that you're going to be processing their information for exclusively humanitarian purposes, people will not come to you. That will mean that they will not have access to fundamental and essential humanitarian services. They will not have access to healthcare, they will not have access to sanitation, nutrition, and the effects are huge for everybody.
All right, and now presenting to us one case study is Gilles. Gilles, question for you. How do we put the Red Cross online? How do we put the Red Cross on our data?
Well, I think the video shows very well the dilemma. Innovation, especially digital innovation, offers huge potential to have more impact, but at the same time, they also bring a certain number of risks. And one risk has been mentioned very well, the question of losing trust with the very people we try to protect and assist in crisis if we are not responsible in data protection, privacy, and a lot of other things. So let me maybe give, if I can, an example. I wonder, Dante, if it would be okay if I give an example, just presenting shortly one specific project called Red Safe that we are developing right now, both in Africa and expanding beyond.
Sure. So my colleagues will showcase this. Just a second, Gilles.
Yeah. Shall I present briefly this project? Maybe if you don't have any PowerPoint, I will show you on my phone how it works. But it's just a question of, as I'm not with you, just to make sure that it's okay if I present this now.
Sure, you can present it, Gilles.
Okay, so just to give it's a very practical example. We have developed a prototype called RedSafe, and RedSafe is both a web-based humanitarian digital platform, but it's also an apps, and an apps that can be downloaded on any phone. And what we see more and more when we seek to protect people on the move, internally displaced people and others, is that the first thing they ask is not food or water. The first thing they ask is connectivity. How can I recharge my phone? How can I connect back with my family? How can I get information about what next? What is the situation? And what we have done here is on one app to provide a range of services. So you can see on my phone, it's called a RedSafe app. And you have both information as aid as well as a digital vault. Plus, just because now the situation is dire, some very specific information on access to vaccines for undocumented people. So with this, what we do is the following. When they download this application, they can even have access offline then to information, which is information as aid on where they will find emergency health care very close to where they are. When is it open? Is it for free or do they need any type of payments? Where is the local Red Crescent or Red Cross section located, and what can they do to help? What are where can they get access to safe drinking water, or simply to legal counseling? At the same time, we offer a digital vault where they can store safely their precious documents, ID, identification cards. It can be also education certificates, and it can be a lot of other information, including property titles and so forth. When people are on the move, they are often losing all what they have with them during the journey. And it's a way that they can keep in this digital vault and we have done it through a protection and safety by default. So it's key that it is safely managed and stored, encrypted, and only available with a key to the person that has uploaded the information. We also provide the storage of contact detail of family, of relatives, in order to facilitate the possibility to reunite families or to give news, because often what we see when we have a crisis is that people get separated and they lose track of their loved ones. And finally, we push some alerts when they are, for instance, a new risk, be an attack or a natural disaster, so that they are aware of something they should be careful about. So it's just something that we have started with adding geolocalized information. We have offered this mainly in Austral Africa, meaning Southern Africa, and we are this year starting to expand and test it in Central America, all the way from Honduras, Mexico to the US, including the southern US border. So it's just to tell you that it's learning by doing, but also when we learn by doing, we cannot fail in terms of protection. So we have to really liaise and work with the best science and technological laboratories. And we do seek support from EPFL, ETH in Switzerland, and others beyond, to make sure that we are a responsible data manager and we can maintain trust while offering sometimes critical and vital services. So I just wanted to illustrate this as, the potential to really make a huge difference in the lives of vulnerable people, but at the same time, the need to be extremely careful not to do harm, because beyond the principle of neutrality, impartiality, independence, and humanity, one humanitarian principle which we have to take into account is do no harm. And while we try to do good, we have to make sure that we do no harm.
Thank you very much, Gilles. That's an excellent example of how to solve the issue. I imagine that in some other contexts, to provide such technology to people in need. The private sector can be involved. We can talk about, in this case, tech giants such as Facebook and WhatsApp. And so what are the risks associated in letting the private sector being involved in such technologies? What is the risk of them making use of this as a cheap test ground, essentially? Gilles, do you have any thoughts on these potential risks?
Yes, I think, for instance, when we try to see whether we could imagine some protective emblem in the digital space, which could mirror the protective power of having a Red Crescent or Red Cross on a hospital, knowing that even during a wartime, it shouldn't be attacked, it should be protected. This is something we are trying to see both with tech companies and with universities and technology centers. And then we need to see both the technological feasibility and then the political feasibility of something like that. So it's really a need to work in partnership. And to respond also to your question, it's sometimes a choice to say, okay, do we try to develop and design something which is tailor-made for the International Committee of the Red Cross needs, or do we seek to have off-the-shelves solutions that are kept and upgraded in terms of security, etc. And this is always also a dilemma where we need to have top-notch advice. So it's by engaging companies, seeking advice, also with scientists, technological schools, and others in partnership that we can really advance. And again, I think avoiding a situation where we might lose the trust of the people affected by humanitarian crisis, as well as by other people who let us work in this region, is key. So this is something we have also to engage states, so that the privileges and immunities that we enjoy in the physical world are also respected in the digital space.
Thank you, Gilles. This links, you mentioned off-the-shelf solutions, and obviously in some cases they are appropriate, but in some they are not, as we saw with the incubator. I mean, the Global Neonet was specifically designed because normal incubators were not adapted to such extreme contexts in some countries. Natalie, where do you feel is the difference, I would say, in how can you tell that an off-the-shelf solution is not appropriate? But then the thing is, the invested cost in developing a tailor-made solution is also very big. I mean, you took a lot of years to develop this solution. So according to you, is there a compromise between off-the-shelf and totally tailor-made?
I can talk about our experience, and indeed what we prefer to do is to create the startups, because right from the beginning we create social business model with all the parameters, the social environmental parameters that we care about, and it's in the DNA of our project and of our startup. Whereas when you transfer the technology to an existing company, it's more difficult for these companies to follow the vision, the spirit, and the social business model you have in mind. So in our case, what we do is that all the solutions we create, if we do transfer the solutions to the private sector, we keep the IP rights, because we call, IPR, stand for our intellectual property, but we like to play around with this acronym and say we call it the intellectual, responsibility. And so this is a guarantee for us that those social environmental parameters, as well as price parameters are respected. Otherwise, we take it back.
Very good. That makes me think also IP rights, also in terms of research in a more broader sense, in terms of open data. Elke, in terms of your technologies for dry lands, can you also imagine a way of you keeping IP rights there for some of the results of your research, or do you think is it okay to go full blast and open research for such initiatives? What do you think are the risks in terms of academic excellence and research if we just open the taps and make it open research for everybody? In a humanitarian setting.
That's a difficult question, but it's good to ask. I think the way things are standing at the moment, we should be, that's my personal perception, we should be more open with IP, especially with IP that it has a potential to support food security, food and water security, for example, to take an example from our field. You know, when we develop something new, then immediately, you know, for the reputation of the university, it's important, oh, make a patent. And that also means that in the end, let's say the use is restricted. But on the other hand, I'm also working for everyone. I'm not only working to have a credit on my CV, but I'm working for everyone. This is a little bit, my feeling is always that the direction of research is a bit directed towards adding publications and patents to the CVs of the researchers rather than towards really finding solutions. Yeah, and here the way that researchers are assessed has to be very critically reviewed, I believe.
So would that be a block, I would say, a hindrance to trickling down technology, IPs in some institutions?
I think so. Yes, I think so. Yeah, I mean, strictly speaking, I wouldn't probably not even have been really allowed to present this valley idea to you if I would be very serious about, you know, patenting this and keeping it for myself. But then again, the purpose is, okay, well, how will I ever find people who might be interested and who might be, you know, bringing it to Yemen or to any other country? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that actually, I think we discovered also a very interesting perception on the nexus between private entrepreneurship, humanitarian aid, and innovation, the IP. I mean, it is also something to bear in mind. Before we move on to closely end the panel, I would wanted to open the floor to any questions you might have. Yes.
Oh, thanks a lot. Just on data, I think at the UN, I think I'm Maher Nasser, the Commissioner General for the UN at Expo, but also I work in the Department of Global Communications in New York. We have been looking at the issue of data. Of course, data is not just the private sector that sees wealth in data. We have already, more than 10 years ago, created something called the Global Pulse that works with the companies that deal and have data to identify ways, and they work with humanitarian agencies to identify and how we can do better in serving humanitarian causes and refugees. In 2016, UNHCR and WFP collaborated on a project in Jordan whereby they took the biometric data of refugees through the iris. So they used the technology from a British company called Iris Scan. So instead of carrying a refugee identity, the refugees have their iris scanned, their biometric data is reserved, the money that is for their food. And WFP no longer distributes food in kind. In some humanitarian cases they do, but usually it's a value. So the refugees go to a supermarket, they collect, they go to pay, the cashier scans their iris through blockchain, by the way, because that's also a verified digital transaction channel, goes to where the registration is, they verify that that's the person, the money is transferred, and the payment is made. Of course, only last year, I think there was a group of NGOs were expressing concern about the human rights and the validity of data, but UNHCR and WFP responded that the way that they are dealing with the confidentiality of the data outside of this chain is the same, and that they have measures to protect it. But I haven't seen it replicate in other areas. So there might be certain reasons that it worked in Jordan because of the availability of the technology so this is just to say that data is indeed the future, and who holds the data holds power. And we are looking for ways in the UN to make sure that, whether it's in the humanitarian sphere, definitely, but also to deal with climate change and the studies that UNFCCC does. It's all about looking models and science, and I think we have to bring back what is the problem today that we face is also the loss of trust in institutions. And because of the loss of trust in institutions, when we say, wear your mask, keep it away, take the vaccine, you have the large number of people who are refusing to take the vaccine, a large number of people who have made the mask political, and so on. So we have to bring back faith in science, because science is our way forward, and everybody has a responsibility to do that, and Global Goals Week is the best opportunity to do it. Maybe just one last question on the incubator and the technology. And you mentioned the disposal and items thrown away. Batteries are also a problem to get rid of. So how did you also factor that in? Because we talk about the substances and chemicals and all of that, and runoff in soil, and it affects soil. And so maybe just that last question.
Oh, I'm so glad you're raising this question. This is not lithium. This is a thermal battery. This is paraffin. So basically, when the power is on, the paraffin is melted. When the power is out, the heat in the paraffin is going to be in the hood. And slowly the paraffin will become rigid again. And so on and so forth. It's not lithium. It's really sustainable, and it's safe also for the security of the babies. But it's a very good question.
Thank you. Sorry, I just wanted to go back to the data dilemma. I think this is an extremely relevant comment, and the loss of trust. Gilles, you were saying at the ICRC, trust is paramount because you deal with many different stakeholders. Do you agree with the statement that the loss of trust is one of the biggest challenges that maybe international organizations and sciences face? And governments, absolutely. And the ICRC, you mentioned your projects. And do you think your response is appropriate? How do you see the evolution in, let's say, 10, 20, 30 years?
I fully agree with the statement, and that was an excellent intervention. I cannot agree more. On the one hand, data is paramount. It can help us take evidence-based decisions. It can help us, understand much better and in real time the evolution of vulnerability risks and the situation. And it can help, especially in the example that was provided now with through biometric data, to have a simplified and more secure solution. But the key question is always, well, do we need to collect all this data in terms of what it will provide in terms of additional efficiency and effectiveness gain and impact? And what can we manage then the data safely and in a responsible manner in order to maintain the trust of everyone? And so this is why I think it's important, for instance, with the ICRC, we have adopted a policy on biometric data. And sometimes we say, well, let's not make it as a default option, and sometimes let's not use it. And let's collect the data we really need because we will process it, but let's not collect big data for the sake of, then being swamped with too much data and not directly using in the analysis. Another thing for research is that we have we have established a research ethics board at the ICRC, but also when we discuss, of course, with academics outside, to make sure that the subject of our research often are the people whose life is shattered by crisis, and we have to put them at the center. And we have to put their interest and long-term interest at the center in terms of protection, dignity. And that's where I think it's good to have these ethical discussions. It's often a dilemma, but we have to address those dilemmas in order to take the best decision in the interest of the people we seek to protect and to assist.
Thank you, Jean. I was wondering if you have any other questions that you'd like to ask our panelists. Nope. If this is not... Yes, please, Fadi.
Thank you. Fadi Boyoud, EPFL Middle East. We have at EPFL a technology where we store the heat from the summer in the ground to use in the winter, and the other way around. We store the cold, let's say coldness of the winter, we store it in the ground and then reuse it in the... I would be very happy to introduce technology to you and the professor who's Louis, who's next to your office, I believe, at the PFL, DS Louis. So we have something similar, and I would be happy to discuss this. Yeah.
Thank you, Fadi.
I'd like to comment on data quite quickly.
Sure. Does your microphone work?
Maybe just to sort of bring us to what the future is going to be with Web3 and the metaverse. This is where information becomes decentralized. When we talk about, you know, the UNHCR and that WFP project, those organizations owned the data. With ICRC, you own the data. With Web3 and the metaverse, the data is decentralized. It isn't owned by an organization. And I think when we move toward that, only then can perhaps the trust be there, because no one actually, you know, it's my data, I own the data. And this is sort of what blockchain brings. And I think this is where the future is headed, where, you know, within Web3, where it's more user controlled as opposed to being controlled by Facebook or Meta or by Microsoft. They no longer will own our data. And I think this is where we need to head.
Thank you, Rory. So, oh, yes, one last question for the gentleman in front.
Thank you. It's just a rapid question. I would like to thank you because you presented the machine from Pristem, that it's powered from one of our devices. So I'm really proud of this presentation because it was a surprise for me. Basically, the inverter that it's inside, it's as well made in Switzerland, and this is a real topic that we are proud of. So. Of the made in Switzerland, where our company is based. So just one rapid question. I'm wondering if the incubator is powered by the same device or the same range of device, the inverter. I don't know if you are aware of, but yeah. It was just to thank you because you made proud of that. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, I think we can gently conclude. I would like to give a bit of a summary between, I remember, the nexus between entrepreneurship, innovation, and humanitarian aid. The nuts and bolts of this are not simple. And I think the main task, one of the main ingredients, is multidisciplinarity. I mean, we're talking about data, batteries, food, you name it. And all of these are part of the solution. And I think the conversations, you were saying, Natalie, the other day, that sometimes you have some professors who are so niche in certain areas, but they don't speak with each other. And I think this communication is also key amongst these different stakeholders. Now, of course, there are obstacles to this. We mentioned the private sector. The interests might not be aligned with fully humanitarian interests. And also one obstacle that we identified tonight is the IP, intellectual property. I mean, how can we go beyond this? How can we work with this? How can we make sure that IP does not entrave the circulation, the trickle down of technology to the ones who need it the most? One element also is the data and how this is a challenge but also an opportunity, and how do we maintain the trust. And last but not least, the funding. The funding, c'est le nerf de la guerre, l'argent. As we say in French, it's vital. And of course, we can talk about the meta at the macro level, the funding, but also at the micro level, the seed capital necessary to not only help the ones in need, but then give them opportunities to go into the level of entrepreneurship. And so I'd like to just ask you one or two words in conclusion. What else do you think is the magic ingredient to allow this nexus to thrive for us to achieve the SDGs?
Should Gilles begin?
Gilles, according to you.
Okay, so I start. I think Dante, you provided a good summary of some of the biggies, some of the major issues. Because of the sake of time, I will just pick one. Maybe you mentioned resources, finance. What I saw over the past for instance, the past 2 years, when we developed this partnership that Natalie referred to, where we really bring research through call for proposals with a humanitarian organization like my organization, and we come up with extremely exciting piece of research which provides us, vision on what we could and should do. Often it's our usual donors. They are not the ones usually funding something which is multi-year, which is transformational, which is highly innovative, and which is complex because it's multi-stakeholder, as you mentioned. It will involve the private sector developing solutions. It will involve academics and us as a humanitarian organization and others like UNHCR, etc. So we really need to find a way to go from this initial research into prototyping, developing, testing in different contexts, because everything is contextual and cannot be applied just without adapting to the realities, and then scaling up. And I think we still have to garner support from people really interested in this frontier investment and work in making I think a sea change, but which is highly transformational. And I think that the conversation we just had is really illuminating on the potential, on some of the way forward. And I really very glad to be part of the conversation and to continue the conversation with all of you, and hopefully next time in physical presence.
Thank you very much, Gilles. Natalie, what would be your conclusion?
My conclusion would be that obviously technology is making us dream, and we dream technology, and the solutions that have been created are absolutely mind-blowing, and the technologies coming will be mind-blowing as well. But I think technology is a tool, and should remain a tool, and that if we want this nexus to work, maybe we should really consider what Gilles said earlier, that what's important is the do no harm approach, and to put the human at the center of everything. That's, to me, that's the essence.
Thank you. Elke?
Yeah, I mean, first, of course, interdisciplinarity, very important. Technology is very important. But in the end, I believe that all this will also involve a bit of a sacrifice. If I would ask you, and it will be ultimately the readiness to sacrifice a bit that determines whether or not we will achieve this at a global scale or not. If I would ask you, would you be ready to go for a car that consumes only 2 liters instead of 8 per 100 kilometers? Then many people would say, yes, I would, if the car is as big as the one I'm driving now. So technology can help us to bring us to this, but there are limitations. Yeah, and then also the step from the technology side has to come towards developing such a car. If this is not totally possible, then I have to also say, all right, I would be okay in stepping back and driving a smaller car. And if this step doesn't also happen, then all the technology in the world is probably not really going further. Yeah, and it might not help us to wait and wait and wait for this technology to come up that will allow us to live in a perfect world without any sacrifice, I believe. So, yeah.
Thank you, Edgar. Lorraine?
Thanks. If I can really add to your fantastic comments, and I like the fact that we put the person at the center. I love this. You said the technology is a tool. Well, what we really need is a multi-stakeholder approach. We can't do this on our own. We really have to engage all the actors, not just the humanitarian sector. We really need to engage the private sector. We need to engage governments. We need to engage international institutions. We really need to look and engage multiple partners to really address these huge global problems which we're facing. And I think most importantly, put the person at the center, because just as you said, technology is fantastic and it's going to be beyond our wildest dreams. But at the end of the day, we are the ones that will be using this technology. We're the ones who are the benefactors of this technology. So we have to remember the human at the center of all of this.
Thank you very much, Lorraine. And so, ladies and gentlemen, dear guests, dear viewers, back home all over the world, thank you very much for attending our events. We're going to now have a networking reception aperitif on the rooftop, and you're all more than welcome to attend to continue the conversation. Thank you very much. And a big thank you.